The kitchen clock ticked, but the sound did not fill the room. The man sat at the center of the dining table, his gaze fixed on the surface of his coffee. A film of oil had formed over the dark liquid, and it had long since lost its heat. He did not reach for it. He did not move. His hands rested flat against the wood, fingers spread wide and still. Slowly, he turned his head toward the corner of the table. A framed photograph sat there, catching the dim light of a single bulb. He picked it up. In the image, a child sat on the floor by a window, surrounded by shadows. In the background, two figures stood at a separate table, their backs turned to the boy, caught in the motion of their own work. The child was looking at his own hands, waiting for a glance that never came. The man stared at the boy until his eyes burned. He set the frame back down with precise, controlled movements, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. The silence of the house pressed against him, heavy and absolute, just as it had that day by the window. The office fluorescent lights buzzed, a sharp contrast to the silence of his home. He stared at the screen, his cursor blinking in a steady, relentless rhythm. A colleague leaned over his partition, asking if he was all right. The man felt his shoulders lock instantly. He turned, his features settling into a practiced, flat expression. "I am fine," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. He turned back to the monitor before the colleague could respond. The simple question triggered a sudden, vivid memory. He was 7 years old, kneeling on a rug, tears streaming down his face after a fall. An adult stood over him, eyes averted toward a wall clock. "Stop being so sensitive," the voice said, cold and impatient. The adult walked away, leaving the child alone in the center of the room. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow, yet he did not blink. He kept his posture rigid, fingers poised over the keyboard. He typed the next line of data with mechanical precision, burying the echo of that childhood reprimand beneath the steady hum of the office. Efficiency was his armor. He did not look up again. Back at his desk, the fluorescent light caught a document left in the corner. The title, "Childhood Emotional Neglect and Adult Well-Being," was highlighted in bright yellow ink. He stared at the words, his mind trying to categorize his life as a clinical observation rather than a lived experience. He could not stay in the room. He walked out, seeking the anonymity of a crowded cafe. Inside, the space vibrated with life. At the table to his left, two people leaned in close, their laughter rising and falling in an easy, rhythmic dance of shared emotion. He watched them. He observed the way they touched each other's sleeves, the way their eyes met without fear. He sat at a small circular table, his own cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He did not drink. He gripped the ceramic handle, his fingers tightening until his knuckles turned white. The skin stretched thin and bloodless. A deep, throbbing pressure built behind his ribs, a physical manifestation of the chasm between their effortless connection and his own suffocating stillness. He remained motionless, a stone in a flowing river, terrified that if he loosened his grip for even a second, the entire structure of his composure would collapse into nothingness. He returned home to the silence of his apartment. He walked to the hallway mirror, stopping dead. He stared at his own eyes, searching for a trace of recognition, but the face looking back felt like a stranger's mask. He leaned in, his breath fogging the glass, and touched his cold skin. Later, in the park, he watched a parent pull a child into a tight, lingering embrace. He stood 10 feet away, motionless. A sharp, stinging sensation bloomed in the center of his chest. He reached up, his hand hovering over his sternum, pressing against the fabric as if trying to locate the source of a physical wound. He hurried home, the ache intensifying with every step. He locked the door and sat on the edge of his bed. The performative rigidity of his posture finally failed. He slumped, his spine curving forward until his forehead rested against his knees. The first tear tracked slowly down his face, hot and sudden. He did not wipe it away. He sat in the dark, breathing raggedly, finally admitting that the emptiness inside was not a failure of character, but a wound that had been ignored for far too long. The grief was real. He reached for the notebook on his nightstand and a pen. The paper was crisp, untouched, and silent. He pressed the tip to the page, his hand trembling as he formed the first jagged sentence. He wrote about the silence of the house and the ache he had carried for years. As the ink flowed, the tension in his shoulders began to dissipate. He did not overthink the words. He let them spill out, messy and unrefined. For the first time, he was not performing for an invisible audience. He was simply existing. He stood up, the notebook left open on the desk, and walked toward the front door. He turned the deadbolt, the metal clicking with a sound that felt like a release. He stepped out onto the porch. The morning light hit his face, warm and steady. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs without the usual resistance. He looked down the street, his stride lengthening, no longer measured or calculated. The invisible weight he had carried for decades felt lighter with every step he took. He was not fixed, but he was finally present, moving forward as a man reclaimed from the machine he had built to protect himself.